And Colin Reed is here with us this month. Jay Bryant is away for a few weeks. We are taping midweek, but stocks roared into March like a lion at the beginning of the week. NASDAQ setting a new record.
It did, and of course the Dow was right up there in the 15s and holding a little bit steady, maybe a little bit of profit taking. It's kind of been leveling off a little bit, not necessarily any news one way or the other. Except there was a little bit of news that came out that GDP was revised slightly downward over the last few months, and our consumer price index was down a little bit too, almost to the point of deflationary, but there wasn't much of a pause for concern because we recognize that energy prices had dropped so significantly in December.
We'll talk about both energy prices and whether we anticipate the Fed is finally going to move sometime in the coming months. But since we're talking about NASDAQ, it's taken 15 years to get back to this point, the 5,000. That's when the bubble burst back in March of 2000, and that's when everything went bust.
That was a very different era back then. Of course, we had that big run up in the 1990s under the Clinton administration. It was a lot of the big high flyers in NASDAQ are the high tech companies that just don't have the same sort of broad-based speculation as we did. You know, every IPO was doubling, tripling its price on the day, and now we just don't see that. It's more resolved. If anything, maybe a little bit more monopolistic. You know, look at the size of Google and Apple nearing the largest company in the world at a valuation of $700 billion. It's crazy. It's
incredible. With Wall Street going full steam like this, one of the longest bull markets ever. The question obviously comes up time and time again, are we due for a correction?
You know, it's not surprising we'd have a bull market defined by this period of steady increase because it was starting so low and it took so long just to recover. So now I would really more calculate the bull on the previous or the last 3 or 4 years since the point where the market really stabilized. So in that respect, I think it may have some ways to go. And we've talked in the past before that so long as earnings each quarter tend to best the earnings in the previous quarter, then a rise in the stock market valuation seems to make sense.
The Fed seems poised. We've been hearing about it for months now, but do we think that this is the year it's going to happen and maybe as early as this summer?
I think so, although when we see those inflation figures, the actual deflation, that gives them pause for concern. And I think part of the high market is a sense that it could be possibly a little bit later than sooner, certainly not sooner. And of course, we remember a few months ago that a lot of people were speculating that the Fed funds increase was just around the corner. So I think that Janet Yellen is, first of all, very transparent, but obviously very smart, and is managing this very, very well. And
when Fed Chairman Yellen was testifying just a few weeks ago, she said we're going to keep a close eye on the economy and on the numbers. So you may be right. It may be later in the year now.
That's right. And she's like Bernanke, who really tried to be transparent, unlike the predecessor, Alan Greenspan, who spoke in code that I think only he had the special decoder ring to understand what he was saying.
Is there so much time to prepare for this that the feeling is that it might not have that much of an impact?
Right. I think that the pricing has already been factored into the market. There's going to be a little bit of antsy money one way or the other from the little bit more nervous traders, but I think it's pretty much been factored in.
Yeah. We were talking about oil prices and gas prices. Obviously, we're seeing the end right now of the great fall of the gas prices and consumers saving so much money. Prices starting to rebound. Right around here, probably 20-25 cents over the past couple of weeks, a little bit more in other parts of the country where they saw the price get under $2 a gallon. In many states, they've seen jumps 30, 40, 50 cents just over the past couple of weeks. This wasn't unexpected. Everyone thought that the price of gas would rebound. Oil's rebounded a little, not a huge amount, but this isn't a surprise to see the gas prices going back up.
No, not at all, and I think it's actually a good thing. OPEC sent a very clear message out that they're not going to bail out the market this time, that they believe there needs to be a little bit of a shakeout in the shale industry, and I think there has been. We see rig counts going down. We see an awful lot of scrapping of offshore rigs as well. It's going to be a reduced fleet and a reduced capacity for the fracking, but I think that's probably a good thing. It's a precious commodity. If it's artificially priced too low, it really sends out all the wrong messages in moving towards conservation.
Oil still around $50 a barrel. Do you, like many analysts, think that it'll probably end up back around $70, $80 a barrel when all is said and
done? I think so. Brent C crude is already over 60, around 61. There's quite a large differential right now between Brent crude and the Cushing oil, the West Texas Intermediate. A $10 differential had been as low as $1 or $2 in the interim. So I think you're seeing more of a shakeout in the fracking industry, but it takes a long time. Once those sites are drilled, they're going to be keep pumping for half a year or a year. So we see a lot less drilling activity. You're not going to really see the supply response maybe for another 6 months or a year there, but already we see a little bit of future-oriented, forward-looking responses, bringing that price up a little bit.
OPEC strategy back in November seemed to be, we're not going to raise prices, we're not going to overreact, we're going to let it run its course, and now it looks like their strategy is working and paying off, because in the U.S., drills are being shut down and supplies being used up, and it certainly looked as if they took the right course of action.
I think they did, but I don't think they're out of the water yet, because that's quite a renegade sector of the oil industry. It's not the big Exxons and BPs that do 10-year, 20-year planning for their drilling plans. These are guys that are in and out over the space of 30 days. They can decline quickly, but they can also expand pretty quickly as well. I don't think we've seen quite enough of a shakeout to make OPEC sleep well at night.
For consumers, it was nice to see such a dramatic drop in the price, and now for lots of people that probably could use that money, they're seeing that dry up real quickly.
Right, nice Christmas present, but it would have been a great opportunity to impose a higher tax and then use some of that tax revenue to subsidize moving towards more energy self-sufficiency and other more sustainable ways.
Or infrastructure improvements and things like that. But with prices already shooting back up, probably you won't see a number of lawmakers choosing to raise the taxes.
That's right.
Let's talk a little bit about cross-border business. A huge milestone for Bombardier, celebrating the maiden flight of its new C-Series 300 jet at the end of last week at Mirabel, just up in Montreal. I don't know if it got down this far and if we could have seen it here, but they went for a short maiden flight, but that's major for Bombardier. This project is years behind and billions of dollars overrunning in cost. So for the company, this is major to get this plane flying.
It's amazing. It's a plane that's going to compete pretty closely with the 737. It'll be a little bit smaller capacity, much better fuel efficiency by a factor, 20 or 30%. And of course, the 737, I think, is the largest selling airplane in the world. It's actually got quite a range too, depending on how you set the airplane up. So I think that it's a pretty well designed and engineered, and you don't have delays in this industry are inevitable. Look at all the delays with the Dreamliner.
Right. But they've had the bad luck with the CS100 series with the engine problems, and so it seemed like they were having a streak of bad luck for Bombardier.
It is, and I'm sure it's very costly. Just imagine the discounted value of all those delayed orders, and some of the orders would have been canceled, moving more towards Embraer or some other competitor. Yeah. But I have faith in their engineering. It's rocket science. They know what they're doing, and it may take a little bit longer to get there, but it's a very well engineered airplane. They
do have orders coming in now. It is, as you mentioned, quite competitive. They'll be going up against both Airbus and Boeing. So they're two now with their smaller planes. I mean, they certainly compete with their turboprop planes and have competitors, but now they're taking on the bigger guys. With these new planes. It did cost the CEO his job, though, this unsettled period, and finally getting this plane off the ground. There's a new head at the company to lead them into this new era.
That's right. I think some head had to roll. You're talking about tens of billions of dollars of losses. But
since we're talking about things that fly in the sky, the Federal Aviation Administration has published its long-awaited proposed rules on drones, and it looks for the time being that they're going to be pretty limited in what they're going to allow as far as drones flying around. We're not going to see Amazon getting its wish quite yet of being able to deliver diapers and movies using drones.
Right, I think not. Although I'm actually surprised that the regulations end up being quite as liberal as they are. You know, FAA's regulatory agency that's used to working with highly regulated segments, the airlines, the pilots who really understand the jeopardy of losing their license. So this new category they've assembled really can appeal to groups that aren't necessarily in that old and very well established camp of flying, and maybe a little bit more willing to flaunt the regulations than a typical pilot would be, as we've seen by some of these renegades who fly their drones around hotel rooms or around Paris right now.
Right, and certainly the concern, there have been a few close calls near airports where planes have encountered them. So, so obviously the FAA will set these rules for now and then see how it plays out. Do you think down the road, is it too early to look into the future to see if they could become the type of workhorse that many people believe they could? We talk about Amazon and delivering packages, but many people do see beneficial uses for them in many, many ways.
I do too, and I think it's more likely that the beneficial uses would be more computerized navigation systems rather than renegade pilots with their joysticks. If that were the
limits
case,
where it will fly, so you don't have to worry about straying out of the airspace.
Precisely.
Since we're talking about border issues, let's talk about the exchange rate, about 20% right now, and it has been for a while. And you brought up an interesting point. You see a direct correlation between the exchange rate and gas and oil prices.
That's right. On a whim, I compared the price of oil over the last 15 years or so with the exchange rate, and I was expecting to see a little bit of correlation, but I adjusted the scale so they kind of started off at the same point and kind of ended up at the same point kind of deal. And in between, they tracked as if they're dancing together. It was remarkable. I think that the price of oil is explaining 90% of the changes in the price of the Canadian dollar.
What do you read into that?
Most of the kind of differential mismatch between supply of Canadian products and demand for Canadian products all has to do with the oil industry. So when the oil industry is selling oil at quite a high price, a lot more dollars are flowing into Canada and pulls that Canadian dollar
and obviously up. Canada, a huge oil producer.
That's right, and all the other aspects of trade are probably much more on a sustainable basis, so that really is the difference maker.
We talked last month about the exchange rate. You own a business here in Plattsburgh. Is it still too early to tell if you're seeing an impact from the exchange rate or if you're just seeing an impact from the winter, a cold winter, and whether it's having an effect on business?
Yeah, you're right. We don't see an awful lot of Canadian business during the winter down here. It's somewhat unusual. We'll see that start to pick up again in May or so. But I think there are things that the local downtown businesses are now talking about, whether they should take Canadian dollars at par. I was reading up at the same time as I was looking at those graphs, reading up a little bit on studies of the Canadian exchange rate and how it affects cross-border shopping. And from what I gather, other regions in the country feel it more acutely than we have. Our sales tax revenue, for instance, at the county has been on a pretty nice upward trend. And I couldn't really discern a strong exchange rate effect. There's a little bit of an effect, and I believe there's a little bit of a tapering off now, but it's, when the exchange rate changes by 20 or 30%, you're not seeing a 20 or 30% drop in traffic at all.
Other communities along the northern border say they're seeing
That's
an
right.
impact, restaurants and hotels and other businesses. Obviously, there are areas like Messina and Ogdensburg where they're right on the border and probably have always seen traffic that will make that 5 or 10 minute trip. The Watertown area, interestingly enough, the chamber over there, the Greater Watertown Area Chamber, has been encouraging businesses, urging them really to take Canadian money, accept it at par, saying that they really want to try to spur tourism and they'd like businesses to do that. I guess hotels often will do that anyway. I don't know if other businesses will follow suit. Over here, the North Country Chamber of Commerce, when asked about that, said they're going to let the businesses make up their own minds, that they're not really going to take a position on it and encourage them to do that. Has that always notoriously been what has been done here in the North Country, on the North Country Chamber in the Plattsburgh area, let the businesses pretty much decide?
I think so, and of course the chamber here is a large regional chamber that covers quite a wide swath, not only abutting the Canadian border. But you know, my observation from running a shop too is that most Canadians don't use cash, they pay by credit card, so there's really no easy mechanism to do an exchange rate adjustment for them. It's not just as easy as taking a $10 Canadian, giving them back changes if it's $10 American.
You've seen some businesses, and so have I, in the past couple of weeks, where they're charging more than the exchange rate. They're charging 25%, maybe in some cases 30%. So that that's obviously their decision, but that you would think that that might be a deterrent once it gets to 25–30% for some Canadians.
And I remember growing up in Vancouver, every bank in Vancouver accepted American exchange and gave you a going rate for it. A lot of the banks in this area just really aren't set up for accepting Canadian exchange. So I think that the local merchants find accepting Canadian to be a little bit of a banking hassle, and I really encourage the banks along this tier to offer a competitive Canadian exchange rate for their Canadian and their American customers and American merchants.
Again, in the Watertown area, I guess they're hopeful that it might spur tourism a little more. Do you really think that if more businesses offer the Canadian dollar at par, that it has that effect? You
know, Watertown I think is a little bit different. First of all, their market near them, they've got Kingston, Ontario. It's probably the largest town. It's a town of about 125,000 people. And that's a lot of people in the Kingston area, if they do go down to the States, they'll go shopping in Watertown. We've got an area of, you know, millions of people to the north of us. And I think they're coming down for other reasons than simply to come shopping here, just to kind of get out for the day and go and look at something interesting in Plattsburgh.
Right,
Watertown
we know
doesn't
using
have
the
those.
airport, certainly.
That's right.
To fly out.
I think we've got a little bit more of an inelastic demand, insensitive demand than Watertown does, and as a consequence, I don't think we're seeing quite the elastic effect that a Watertown is.
Are there a number of businesses here in this area that for years have taken Canadian money at par and continue to do so?
There have. You know, I've spoken to some business people who say that's their course of policy. I think it's a good one.
Does the Chamber of Commerce list those businesses and provide that to Canadians? I guess that's also part of this push in Watertown, is that they're going to list all the businesses so that when Canadians stop at the Chamber, they can get a list of where their money's taken at par.
That's a good idea. We should discuss that within the Downtown Association. One thing we are discussing is creating a list and making it available to visitors of which businesses are open, for instance, on a Sunday. Most of our Canadian visitors would have to come down on a Saturday or Sunday. For our local people, it's quite discretionary when they go down shopping, but Saturday and Sunday are really 2 days. If you closed one of those days, you're missing 50% of the market. And we're more concerned about a Canadian being deterred from coming down thinking, well, Plattsburgh is closed all weekend, because 50% of the time they're down here, it's closed.
And part of that was from a New York Times article a few years ago where they rode their bikes and they followed a trail and they came into Plattsburgh on a Sunday and couldn't find a place to eat. And so that was a little negative publicity for the city and for the downtown that with that article, and that may have prompted this a little bit.
That's right. We certainly sent that around so the shop owners could see that. But it's too bad those cyclists didn't ride their bicycle right by Campus Corner. I think Campus Corner is one of my favorite places to go on a Sunday morning.
You bet. It is. It is good. Downtown businesses, is it hard to be open on Sundays? Is there just really not the traffic in Plattsburgh that warrants you staying open? Is that why many of them are closed?
That's probably true, especially now. But I think we have to look at things from the long term. If a few of us, in an isolated way, decide to be open for a few months one summer and evaluate at the end of the summer, we'd probably conclude that doesn't make sense. But if enough of us were open for a few years every Sunday, I think people start recognizing clearly there's now a reason to start going into Plattsburgh. It's a cultural and marketing kind of change that can't happen overnight.
We talked about the Canadians coming back and forth. It was just this week that Senators Schumer and Gillibrand announced that they're urging Canada to lower the duties that they're charging on American goods that Canadians are taking back, that they're buying here and taking back with them across the border. They want the duties that Canada charges to be more in line, on par with what the U.S. allows for Americans coming back from Canada. Right now, Americans can bring up to $200 worth of merchandise purchased in Canada back to the U.S. duty-free, and $800 if they spend more than 2 days in Canada. And Schumer really would like Canadians to have the same sort of deal, that they could take that amount back across the border. That would be beneficial, obviously, to businesses down here.
It would be very helpful. I know the local wine association is very sensitive about this, because a Canadian would have to be down here for 48 hours just to have the privilege to bring 2 bottles of wine back with them. And obviously, if you go on a wine trail and you go to 6 places and you want to enjoy a bottle of wine at each one, you're now well over your limit of what you can bring back duty-free. I'm not even sure if it's entirely a duty issue, but you have to go in and declare and fill out all the forms and get out of line and in line, and it's such a transaction cost that I notice at the wine shop, customers are very sensitive about that and very cognizant that they're not going to want to bring wine home with them.
Congressman Bill Owens, we've talked about this with him before. He's likewise called for this, and they've asked the Canadians to reconsider, but up to this point they haven't had luck. Perhaps if 2 U.S. senators or more are on board and start urging them, maybe they'll have some success.
And one way they might proceed with it is they don't want the tail to wag the dog. Just because there's one region here where this is a very important issue, they may not want to liberalize all across a 4,000-mile border. But one suggestion the Wine Association had is to form some sort of wine association across the border, and for the wines that are grown in the 2 contiguous regions, have some sort of policy for easy transportation of wine across the border, only for those wines. So somebody's not coming down here and buying 10 cases of California wine to bring it up to Quebec.
In New York State politics and news, Governor Cuomo again is talking about raising the minimum wage. Just this week he was making several stops around the state, really pushing to raise the minimum wage up to $10.50 an hour. It would be a dollar higher in New York City. New York just raised the minimum wage, and it's scheduled to go up to $9 at the end of the year. Do you see the need there, the push to add another $1.50, or is it going to get to a point where small businesses like yours say, we can't absorb that much that quickly?
I think it is a really big issue for small business. We've also seen that Walmart, recognizing the tightness of the market, is voluntarily raising the offered wage that they can pay, and they can afford to pay. They've got the economies of scale that a small business doesn't necessarily have. So I guess if we'd like to consolidate and monopolize our industries a little bit more, then raising the minimum wage is a good idea. Now, I'm not at all insensitive to the working families. I think that we should be liberalizing such mechanisms as the earned income tax credit, making them much more attractive to get people more into the labor force, rather than putting that on the backs of small businesses and then presumably seeing fewer small businesses and more of the big franchises taking over the marketplace.
The governor is hoping that lawmakers will go along with the increase to $10.50 an hour. His labor commissioner, though, the governor and his labor commissioner have taken the step for tipped workers that are getting $5 right now per hour. By the end of the year, they'll be getting $7.50 an hour, and they've gone ahead and announced that they're going to make that adjustment. So for the housekeepers, the hotel housekeepers, the waiters, and the other people who work in the service industry, they do have raises coming at the end of the year, and for them, that's a pretty significant raise.
It is. I think that's well justified. There's different categories, obviously, of tipped workers. Some tipped workers really don't make much tips at all, or they might have a policy where they share the tips, and I imagine trying to get by on $5 an hour as a busboy and not really getting much of the share of tips. That's pretty rough. And
in the few moments that we have left, are we potentially looking at a showdown over the budget in New York State this year? They've passed the budget on time for 4 years in a row under Andrew Cuomo, but this year he's tying the passage of the budget to a few of his big agenda items, his education reforms and his ethics reforms, and saying that he's not going to sign a budget without lawmakers signing off on those, and setting the stage for what could be a major showdown when it comes to getting the budget passed by April 1st.
With 3 different men in the room now too, so it should be very
exactly.
interesting.
Sheldon Silver indicted, facing corruption charges, out of the picture. Carl Hastie, the new Assembly Speaker, in there. Jeff Klein also in there. So a number of men in the room now that are going to be negotiating this. But obviously the governor this year trying, when he was here in Plattsburgh a couple of weeks ago, tying school aid increases and tying other budgetary items to getting his reform packages passed.
Right, and of course we've heard him talk like this with regard to ethics reform and have that essentially go nowhere or vetoed, or forming different commissions which he disbands before the conclusions are out. So we'll have to see where it goes, but certainly he's the master of the politics of this.
Good. Colin Reed, nice to have you here. Always good to see you. And that is our business edition for this month. We want to thank Colin Reed for being here, and thank you for watching. For all of us here at Mountain Lake PBS, I'm Tom Hellick. We'll see you next time.